Hello and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. The other day, one of my viewers on the Ellie Dreams Another channel on YouTube asked me to do a tarot card reading on the question of whether the ancient Library of Alexandria might still provide us with the chance of finding new wisdoms from the ancient past. The library no longer exists, it seems. It was destroyed in a fire nearly 2,000 years ago. And so you'd think that perhaps all of its contents would be destroyed along with its physical structure. But you never know. I love to do tarot readings on this kind of woo woo subject in particular. I'll do tarot readings on anything really, from questions about aliens and ancient civilizations and interesting people, what might happen in the future for humanity, what's happened in the past, things like cold cases, what makes a person tick, their biggest secret, their biggest regret, and messages from the beyond, and pretty much any topic whatsoever. Whatever the question is, as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy to lay down some cards and just see what they say. When I do this, I'm not relying on any kind of psychic ability or anything like that. Yes, I guess you could say I'm quite an intuitive person, but no more so than anyone else in the world could be out there. I just happen to be well practiced, and I've learned how to still my mind when I need to, or how to compartmentalize between my emotions and what might be expressed in the cards that I'm reading during a tarot card reading and that kind of thing. I read the cards like a language, like quite a sophisticated language. And so I use a standard range of definitions for each card, and I examine them from the perspective of those definitions, along with the relationship between the cards as they're placed into a standard configuration that I like to use, and any context that I'm aware of, and the mood of the cards, the color and the sorts of symbols that have appeared, and things like that, and what those symbols have represented in history. It's quite a complex kind of language that I read. So when I'm doing a tarot card reading, I'm reading something that doesn't require me to poke around inside my mind and find an answer from some kind of mystical place or anything. I'm communicating with another entity, I'm supposing, who's out there. And as it happens, me and the other entity, are using a common language that we both understand. And the tarot cards are the vehicle to help us to express that language. So when I do a tarot reading on something like the question about the Library of Alexandria, I get a response. If I get a response that appears to indicate that there is something out there that might one day be located and perhaps even be quite revelatory, then it kind of gets my interest. And that's what happened with this particular tarot card reading. The cards seem to indicate that, yes, the library was destroyed in a fire. Well, the cards didn't necessarily say that, but the ancient knowledge that had once filled the library has not all been lost. That's what the cards said. And that it would one day be found. And when it is found, it will be quite extraordinary new information that helps to fill many gaps in knowledge and also re-educate us into the history of humanity and the path moving forward towards our future that we can expect to travel as humans. I wasn't particularly aware of the history of Alexandria in Egypt or the Library of Alexandria. So I decided to see what I could find to help me to better understand, or to understand more just about the whole concept of the city and the library and the rest of the history, but also to help me to see if I can locate any of the theories out there about what might have happened to knowledge from that time and where that knowledge might reappear one day. Because, I do feel as though there's more out there. So let's take a little look, or take a journey back to take a look and see if we can get a sense of how the city of Alexandria came to be, how it was influenced by different phases of time or different ages, and why it's now considered to have been the center of knowledge in the ancient world. So, Alexandria was founded by the ancient Greek leader Alexander the Great, and therefore it was called Alexandria. Alexander the Great founded it in 331 BC. He had just conquered Egypt. His conquest had been quite smooth, actually, and reasonably bloodless as well compared to most hostile invasions, because largely he was quite a strategic thinker and he'd planned his invasion well in terms of its timing. But also, the Egyptians of the time were generally peaceful and had welcomed the entry of the Greeks, completely unaware of the fact that the purpose of their visit was to take ownership of Egypt's vast riches, its beautiful women, and wealth from trade and manufacture. The Persian forces that were governed by the governor of Egypt at the time, whose name was Mazakes, I think, ultimately surrendered to Alexander's forces, and the city of Memphis, along with the entire province of Egypt, was handed over to the Greeks without a fight. Memphis was at the time the capital of Egypt, but Alexander the Great turned Alexandria into the capital. The people of Egypt generally welcomed Alexander and his army, as I said. One of the reasons for this was that the population had begun to experience some hardships under Persian rule, and the overall population were happy to try something new, But also, and probably more importantly, Alexander had defeated the Persian leader, King Darius III, and his army was already an overwhelming presence that stretched all the way along the eastern Mediterranean coastline and as far as Gaza. I mean, he wasn't exactly called Alexander the Great for nothing, I guess. He was quite the conqueror. When he set out to conquer, he generally successfully conquered. And he was quite young as well. I think he was 31 when he took over Egypt. So many Egyptians believed that the New World Order under Alexander's leadership would bring benefit to their lives. And in a way, it kind of did. Alexander was a visionary kind of leader, especially for his age, who had big plans for his new conquest, which he named, of course, Alexandria. He envisaged a grand metropolis that would link Greece to the rich Nile Valley. That's the River Nile Valley. He immediately ordered that work to begin to build his vision. But as it would happen, his ability to conquer Egypt so easily did not go unnoticed, and it sparked a series of subsequent conquests that would see Alexandria evolve quite quickly into quite a special place with many different ancient influences layered within its evolutionary development. So Alexander the Great, yes, he had a vision for this city, a vision of a grand metropolis that would link Greece with the exceptional abundance that was promised by the Nile Valley. The Nile Valley was quite a uniquely placed location that allowed a number of factors to exist together that made it one of the most fertile places for development, agriculture, and trade. The Nile River flooded very reliably every single year, which ensured a continuously rich soil for growing crops. The surge of water and nutrients turned the Nile Valley into really productive farmland. The Nile Valley was also an abundant source for grain, flax, and papyrus, which is the compound that was used for writing, similar to paper today. Not quite as thin as paper, and took a bit of, manufacture to be able to get it going, but it was what they used for paper. These were all resources very much in demand at the time, and the papyrus in particular could be difficult to source. The valley was also perfect for growing wheat, barley, and also flax, which was a product often used to make clothing. I didn't know that they made clothing out of flax, but now they do. There you go. Now I do. The Nile River flowed northward from East Central Africa into the Mediterranean and provided Egypt with a means for transporting materials for building projects. This was a rare gem in an otherwise desert existence, and it meant that large, prosperous cities could be built that could enter into trade with many other nations. The ancient Egyptians had also developed skills and technology for managing the Nile River's floods and had built canals and basins that offered irrigation to farmers. Controlling Egypt and its proximity to the Nile Valley provided Alexander the Great with a significant revenue stream through taxation and trade. Nobody was able to enter the city unless they paid the entry taxes, and the only entrances to Alexandria were via narrow bridges that separated the walled city from the outside world. Now, Alexander the Great had found his utopian world with everything a conqueror could ask for to sustain his wealth and strength for a lifetime. But unfortunately, Alexander ultimately never got to see his vision of Alexandria realized in its final glory. He did get started on the project, but he died 2 years later at the age of 33 after a night, which I think was longer than a night, after a long period of excess food and drink. There is no confirmed reason for his death, but there is speculation that he may have contracted a type of malaria or typhoid disease, or perhaps had been suffering a congenital illness of some kind that would have been undiagnosed during that time. The only thing we know about his death is that he had been on a bit of a binge just prior and suffering fever and intense suffering generally for around 10 days before he died. His death occurred not quite 2 years later, after his army had entered Alexandria, but his vision of the great city outlived him and was continued on by his successor. The man who took over after Alexander's death was called Ptolemy. He did continue with Alexander's vision for the city of Alexandria and turned it into a flourishing metropolis. Under the Ptolemy rule, Alexandria became the intellectual and cultural center of the world. The city was adorned with grand architecture, including the famous Library of Alexandria and the Alexandria Lighthouse. The library was the largest and most significant of its kind in the ancient world, fostering scholarly research in various fields. The Alexandria Lighthouse was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, and it served as a beacon for ships that were navigating the treacherous Mediterranean Sea. Imagine that the lighthouse was like the ancient equivalent to the Statue of Liberty. And then you'll be able to visualize the lighthouse. Many migrants and people who were traveling very perilous waters, and even women also, they defied death to be able to enter into Alexandria and study the wisdoms of its library and seek the prosperity from its thriving manufacture and trade. But also, the culture within Alexandria was such that a small, early number of women were even able to break through the barrier of learning. And unlike in their home countries, for example, Greece, where a woman was really just expected to be a wife and a mother and very little more. I mean, she could have worked out in the field or something, I suppose, but she could have been executed for attempting to seek a professional life or even an academic life. At times, Alexandria was quite progressive, and women began to get accepted so that they could study medicine and philosophy. This might have been due to the early Egyptian influences of worshipping the female deities, but it helped to make Alexandria a beacon of forward thinking and innovative travelers from all over the world came to visit. The Library of Alexandria was at its peak from 323 BC when Ptolemy I took over Egypt, and also through the successors, Ptolemy II and III. This takes us to around about 221 BC, when the Library of Alexandria had become the most famous library of the ancient world. It attracted scholars from around the Mediterranean, making Alexandria the preeminent intellectual center of its time. When Ptolemy III took over, the library's collection of scrolls of wisdom increased significantly. He ordered that all books be taken from any ship that arrived in the ports of Egypt as a condition for entry. The books or scrolls made from papyrus were all copied, and the copies were given back to the owners, but the library kept the originals. Isn't that something? So they had all the taxes and they had all the books. So no wonder it was thriving. And this is where I realized when I was doing my research that the duplicate copies might actually have been what was expressed in the tarot card reading that I had done about the library. Perhaps this was a clue that all of the wisdom may still exist out there somewhere. I mean, imagine how many visitors from all over the ancient world might have entered the ports of Egypt seeking to gain or to share wisdom of the times. Unfortunately, when Ptolemy VIII took over, reign in around 145 BC, so that's all the way through from 1 to 8, he wasn't quite as forward thinking or worldly in his mindset as his predecessors. He ordered that foreign scholars all be expelled from Egypt, and this led to a diminished patronage by later Ptolemaic rulers down the line as well. And so at this point in time, the Library of Alexandria had begun to decline in both its collections of knowledge, the upkeep of those collections, and even the upkeep of the library's buildings. Ignorance, ignorance, man. It raves loud and clear, but when it boils down to it, it's just a form of decay. How sad that time must have been for everyone who wanted to thrive from knowledge of the world and its wisdoms. It's funny, when you're an ignorant person, which I guess Ptolemy VIII must have been, you don't realize that you're what you're missing when you expel the richness of a diverse base of knowledge. But those who were wise would have recognized what was being lost. It must have been really quite heartbreaking for so many scholars who had relied upon this wonderfully abundant library and everything it had to offer humanity. I think it would have been quite heartbreaking because for some people, this scholarly pursuit was their entire existence. And what's even more ironic is that as soon as an ignorant mindset kicks in, the decline begins to occur and the decay begins to set in. And it's just a matter of time before the whole dynasty is overthrown. And yep, that's exactly what happened in Egypt as well. You see, while the clever Ptolemy crew, 1 through 7, were running the place, it was thriving. When number 8 came along with the ignorant mindset, suddenly the country became weak. So Egypt had been thriving for as long as it was ruled with an open-minded ruler. And then it was conquered once the ignoramus took the throne. That's just one of the facts of life. But as we know, you can't teach an idiot anything. They refuse to learn and just have to end up getting overthrown. So in 30 BC, the Romans annexed Egypt. While Alexandria lost some of its prestige during that time, it remained an essential hub for learning and trade. The Romans continued to build and adorn the city with magnificent structures, including the Caesareum. There's a bit of a theme here, which was a temple built by Cleopatra in honor of Mark Antony, which was later repurposed by Augustus Caesar and therefore called Caesareum. The Byzantine Empire then took control of Alexandria in 395 AD. Despite religious strife that was taking place between Christians and pagans at the time, Alexandria remained a center of knowledge, albeit somewhat diminished, for learning and culture. Its scholars made significant contributions to Christian theology at this time as well. In 641 AD, Alexandria was captured by the Arab Muslims, and this marked the beginning of Islamic rule. Under Islamic rule, Alexandria's significance declined quite a bit, and a new capital of Egypt was created called Fustad. Fustad emerged supreme, but Alexandria still retained, even though it was a second city, much of its kind of mystique and grandeur. Fustat remained the capital of Egypt for around 500 years after that, until its leader ordered that it be destroyed as a way to avoid capture during an invasion. Isn't that crazy? That sounds like a really dumb idea. I'm just not sure that burning down your own house to avoid it being burgled is the brightest idea out there, but what do I know? I just came across as being really dumb. So anyway, the Library of Alexandria is believed to have been destroyed by a huge fire. However, it should be noted that this has never been confirmed exactly. There are theories which are based on a variety of architectural findings or parallel events that were taking place at the time. There are a few conflicting theories of what happened to the library. So let's take a look at each of these theories briefly and see if we can kind of, just sort of suss it out a little bit. The first theory is that Julius Caesar destroyed the Library of Alexandria by accident during his civil war in Egypt in 48 BC. He was ruling at the time and was residing in Alexandria when it was besieged. He ordered that the enemy fleet be destroyed by fire in the harbour. And it's theorized that the fire set by Caesar spread into the city of Alexandria, into the area in which the library stood. There is no physical evidence to prove that this theory is an accurate account of what took place, and some people believe that the library was actually too far from the port for it to be possible. Another theory is that the library was destroyed by the Emperor Aurelian during his war with Zenobia in 272 AD, or maybe his war with Diocletian, I think, in 297 AD. There's also no physical evidence to prove that these theories are accurate either, but Aurelian does sound like a bit of a warmonger to me anyway. Another theory is that the library was destroyed by Christian zealots. This theory is primarily based on the actions of Theophilus, who was the Patriarch of Alexandria for a 30-year period around about 400 AD or so. During his reign, the Temple of Serapis was a truly magnificent temple that had been built in Alexandria on a rocky plateau. It overlooked the land and the sea. It was probably the biggest and most striking temple to have been found in Alexandria, and it was erected as a dedication to the god Serapis, who was considered to be the protector of Alexandria. The temple had its own underground library, which was sort of an offshoot or overflow library, connected to the larger Library of Alexandria. It held around about 10% of the entire library's collection. And the theory is that the temple was taken over by the Christians and was converted into a Christian church. In doing so, the Christians destroyed any of the documents that were housed in the temple. When Theophilus, the Patriarch of Alexandria, died, his nephew Cyril, which is, a very charmed name, but anyway, Cyril became Patriarch. A number of riots broke out between the pagans and the Christians at this time, the most notable of which involved a female philosopher and respected member of the Library of Alexandria, who, I don't know how she'd have the power to do this, but she's said to have ordered the killing of a Christian monk, which resulted in a revenge attack against her beloved library, leading to its destruction. I don't know, like, who was she? A scholar can order the attack of someone? I don't know. Anyway, that's the theory. I have to say that this theory, at least, is an interesting one, but I still wasn't able to locate any evidence that it is proven to have occurred. Yes, the riots occurred, but there's no evidence that it resulted in the destruction of the library. And then there is another theory that centers around the Muslim Arab invasion of Alexandria in around 600, I think it was late 600s, so AD, that is based on Arab sources from the 19th century world of literature. So, the information we're relying on is quite recent. This theory, basically all wisdom was considered to either conflict with the Quran or to be unnecessary duplications of the Quran. So upon conquering Alexandria, the Muslim leaders or the Muslim invaders set out to destroy any documents that were not physically the Quran in order to purify the messaging that was permitted to be known by humanity. A bit like what's going on in Florida, at the moment. Right, okay. Not saying who, but I think he calls himself governor. Once again, there is no physical evidence to either prove or disprove this theory, and so it remains just a theory. In fact, there are no architectural or archaeological findings to date that can definitely prove that the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, or that it even existed in the first place. Isn't that interesting? But what does remain is a big, sprawling city called Alexandria that has been built as a modern city over layers and layers of ancient city, each of which represented the many different conquests of Alexandria in the 2,000 years in which it has existed. And if the Library of Alexandria was underground, for example, like it was in the nearby Temple of Serapis, because that library was underground, then it might never have been fully destroyed at all. In fact, it may remain completely untouched for all we know. The problem with knowing for sure is that archaeologists, there you go, I got it. Archaeologists have only been able to excavate the ground in limited areas of Alexandria and in the vast desert areas around the city. There's so much city there, you see, they can't get beyond it. There's still so much of the city's landscape that hasn't been explored because people live there. There's commerce there. They just can't get there. Anything that might exist underground is still yet to be discovered. And this means that there are so many possibilities of finding something in the future. It's actually really exciting. There was also something interesting that came up as I was researching the library's history. The one good thing that might have come out of the small-minded decision-making of the very ignorous Ptolemy VIII ruler and those who followed him is that the library started to go downhill after he expelled all the foreign scholars. The library's patronage began to diminish. And over the next 100 years or so, the library's upkeep, both in terms of its collection of books, but also its physical building, was increasingly neglected. This doesn't sound like good news, but bear with me, it may actually be good news. So let's just say that that kind of thing happened today. What else would be going on around the library if this was the case, right? I think it's human nature to do a number of different things when something is beginning to decay. Firstly, you're going to have your group of lazy folk who just can't be bothered doing their job properly. So they leave this decaying library unattended or unsupervised. They might even take their favorite book or scroll home and just kind of forget to return it later. You might get looters who steal what they can because, whatever it is that will get them a loaf of bread. And of course, you'll have your diehard enthusiasts, the scholars who are outraged about how their beloved library is being left to rot. And so they will also try to preserve what they can and might take some scrolls home for safekeeping or steal them and hide them somewhere, bury them somewhere. I mean, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls in a cave somewhere. They'd been hidden to remain safe. And this could be the case here. They could be trying to avoid the destruction of the documents. And so this could continue on for quite some time while the library is slowly going downhill. And this is not something new that would only happen in modern times. If we haven't learned anything from books like the Bible, for example, then we have definitely learned that people have always behaved like people do. There's always been selfish people, and people have always had their own pet grievances, and they've always had their own self-serving interests that they've tried to protect. So we don't want to glamorize too much the past. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect that if the Library of Alexandria was suffering a gradual decline between 140 BC and as much as 700 AD, then there is a lot of time in between during which all kinds of indiscretions could have been taking place that led to the decline of the library, but may have somehow inadvertently preserved some of its contents. So by the time the Christians came along, and Theophilus was the Christian patron of Alexandria, then it had already been around, been declining for around 500 years. So if he and his crew took over the Temple of Serapis and converted it into a church, or if they set fire to either the temple or the Library of Alexandria, or both, how much value would they really be destroying if the library and its contents had been increasingly neglected for so many hundreds of years prior? I think it gives us a little glimmer of hope here. And the same is the case when it comes to the Muslim Arab invasion of 6 to 700 AD. An even longer period of decline would have passed by that time, when the library might be nothing more than a shell of a place with a sparse collection of whatever is left over, and a couple of old fogies that called themselves scholars. I mean, who knows? A bit like my local library, which is seriously sad, by the way. I live on the Mornington Peninsula of Australia, which is really all about tourists, and it's a pretty coastal region of the country. But culture and wisdom are a rare commodity around here. I joined my local library about a year ago and was really interested in the idea of a virtual library, which they said had written and audio books that they boasted about how wonderful it could be. You could get a bit like Audible or Kindle or all kinds of things. But once I tried the facilities, I'm afraid it was a lot of hype and not much substance. Just having a little whinge there, and I've reached my quota of whinging today. I just wanted to get my 2 cents in about my local library. The council tax around here is really high, and I'm still not sure of what I'm paying for most of the time. But anyway, because they tack on extras for everything else as well. Oh, no. Okay. All right. I'm getting really political. Let's move on. So, what if the theories about the library, or even the libraries, if we include, the smaller temple of Serapis, what if they were in decline for hundreds of years before the supposed fire or fires that people say may have taken place to destroy the library? What if the thousands of books of wisdom from around the world and from the previous ages were not all destroyed? What could have happened to them, and where might they be? And also, we must not forget that the wisdom came from wise philosophers. Without the philosophers, the Library of Alexandria would never have been so renowned in the ancient world. So, who were these scholars that contributed to the library? Well, I mean, here are a couple of names, just to give you a few, because there were many. There was Euclid, who lived between 325 to 265 BC, and he was known as one of the most important mathematicians to ever live. He discovered what is referred to as the elements, which form part of what is now known to be geometry. I have to definitely move on to the next scholar now, because my knowledge of math is so incredibly bad that anything else I might try and say is likely to just embarrass me. And no, I'm not actually sure what geometry is. Seriously, math is not my thing. It really is not my thing. Okay. Let's see. Of course, Ptolemy, who was the leader to take over rule. This is Ptolemy I. He was the leader to take over rule of Egypt right after Alexander the Great. Well, he was a very important scholar at the Library of Alexandria himself. No wonder he wanted to turn Alexandria into the center, the world center of knowledge. He was an astronomer, a very famous astronomer, and he created Geographia, it's called, which I think comes from the Greek, which is the basis of what is now known as geography. I do know what geography is. Okay, so at least I know something. He also wrote many books on astronomy and had mapped out the stars and created an astrological method of analysis that still influences astrologers today. So that was a very clever guy. Plus, he managed to take over Egypt without invading anyone, and he ruled a reasonably peaceful Egypt as well, so that he could pass it on around 8 or 9 times to different successors without much incident. So definitely, Ptolemy is a keeper as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, in my opinion, I love a peaceful guy who builds beautiful cities. So he sounds fab. There's also Hypatia, who lived from around 370 to 415 AD. And she is known to have been the last great mathematician and philosopher of Alexandria. She was a woman who wrote commentary on geometry and who passed on the wisdom of Plato to her students. I mean, the fact that Alexandria was inclusive of women to such a degree is a testament to what a special city it was. Back at that time, most of the world was still very backward thinking about women. And we kind of know that. It's in all of the scripture. It's in all of the documents and scrolls and books that we read from that time and philosophy. And some of the world is still a bit backward like that, but Alexandria was forward thinking. Eratosthenes lived between 276 and 194 BC. He was also a mathematician, and he was able to calculate the circumference of the Earth to within a couple of 100 kilometers of accuracy just by using math. That's pretty impressive. And he was a known contributor to the Library of Alexandria. I mean, some of these names are really difficult for me to pronounce, but let's see another one. We've got Callimachus, I think, created the first ever library catalogue called the Pinakes, which I find particularly interesting because if the Pinakes existed, if there was a library catalogue, then what does it say about what was catalogued in the Library of Alexandria? And why hasn't anyone done a comparison between what's in the catalogue and what has been discovered already? I mean, the only reason why we know about the Pinakes is because it was created in the Library of Alexandria. So wouldn't it be a catalogue of the library? There might actually be an easy answer there, people. I don't know. Am I pulling at straws? I don't know. And so this is just to name a few. There was also Apollonius, which is a name that may sound familiar. Aristophanes. Also, they were epic poets, both of them, that contributed valuable wisdoms that still enlighten us today. There's also a fellow called Hero of Alexandria who designed the first ever steam engine. And, that's just to name a few. There are more and more and more. There were more philosophers that contributed to the Library of Alexandria, both male and female, who have served to help enrich our lives today. And yes, we know that they existed because their work has been found in places outside of the Library of Alexandria. But there are references that link them to the library. Is this perhaps evidence of the many duplications that exist around the world? Or is it perhaps evidence that the library's contents were moved? If not all of the contents, then perhaps some of the contents. There's also another thing to note about the Library of Alexandria, and that is that it was most certainly one of the biggest libraries of knowledge in the world, thanks in part to a very aggressive desire by Ptolemy's 1, 2, and 3 to build a solid and well-funded collection of texts that would inspire humanity and create a legacy of just awesomeness of their leadership. Yeah, so it was a testament to them as well. And an acknowledgement of how vast the world and the universe and the prospects for humanity could be. However, the Library of Alexandria was merely part of a larger research institution that existed in the ancient world, which was called the Mauseon. The Mauseon was dedicated to what is referred to as the Muses. And the Muses are also called sometimes the 9 goddesses of the arts. So I'll probably refer to them one or the other. These 9 goddesses are said to have been the 9 beautiful daughters of the god called Zeus, who was considered to be the king of the gods. Zeus's 9 daughters were each believed to represent a different aspect of the arts. So of these 9 daughters going down through their ages, Calliope was the oldest of these daughters, and she was the muse or the goddess of poetry. Clio was the muse or goddess of history. Erato was the muse for love poetry specifically. Euterpe was the muse for music. Melpomene was the muse for tragedy, which I guess means she was the muse for Shakespearean type of stuff, because I think Shakespeare did a lot of tragedies, didn't he? Yep. So she probably inspired Shakespeare. Polymnia was the muse for sacred hymns. Terpsichore was the muse for dance. Thalia was the muse for comedy. And Urania was the muse for astronomy. These 9 daughters were named muses or goddesses because it said that they were the sources of inspiration for scholars and artists and poets because of their profound beauty. The word muse comes from the title of the institute Mausian, which these days has been translated into the modern word museum. So there you go. You can see where the language has developed. So the Library of Alexandria is believed to have housed as many as, 100, more than that, 500,000, or even more than 500,000 different scrolls of wisdom at the height of its glory. However, the exact layout of the library is not known, and whether it was built above ground or below ground is not known. And so, for all we know, it might still exist somewhere beneath the modern city of Alexandria in Egypt, underneath layers of Greek civilization and Roman civilization and Arab civilization and more. What historians believe is that the library consisted of long walkways with Greek columns on either side and shelves of books and scrolls between the columns, similar to some of the structures that were built for our most historically renowned universities these days, such as Cambridge in England or Harvard in the US. They've been modeled over the understanding of what the Library of Alexandria looked like. And there was a shared dining room there. There were reading rooms, meeting rooms, manicured gardens, and lecture halls. And in addition to the smaller library at the Temple of Serapis, the nearby Alexandria Palace, which was home for the ruling leaders of Alexandria, also had an additional smaller library that was believed to have housed as many as 400,000 scrolls and manuscripts. So, we're talking about there may have been over 1 million different scrolls, books, manuscripts in this collection of libraries. As for the theory of a hidden collection of books and scrolls from the Library of Alexandria, there isn't any concrete evidence or widely accepted theory. The fate of the Library of Alexandria and its contents remains a bit of a mystery. We know from many of the writings of the time that there were rivalries between libraries in the ancient world, and for this reason we know that the Library of Alexandria existed in some form because the writings that have been found do talk about rivalries between Alexandria and other places where other libraries by other leaders were being constructed. There was a competitive kind of arms race related to knowledge and wisdom that was taking place in the ancient world at this time. And thanks to this, we know that the library did indeed exist, but there is no definitive historical record of how exactly the library was constructed, what the works were that were entirely held within its walls, and what on earth happened that might have, been that may have actually affected as many as 1 million scrolls and books of wisdom linked to the libraries across Alexandria. There's just no physical proof of any kind that it existed. But there's lots of hints of it here and there. One thing that actually might confuse people as they research the Library of Alexandria is that there are many documentaries, and I use that in inverted commas. Some are quite bona fide documentaries, but also there are experts out there who talk about the library as though it physically existed in a particular known location, and that even modern tour groups can go and see it, can go and see the remnants of it or something like that on holiday or for research. But none of that is actually true. The truth about the Library of Alexandria is that we have zero physical evidence that it ever existed. The only thing we have to go by, or the only things we have to go by, which allow us to believe that it did exist, are the remnants of other smaller libraries, like the temporary palace library, for example, or the Temple of Serapis. We can also read about the library in some of the texts that were written after the fact or during construction. Most of the texts were in fact written as many as 300 years after the library was said to have been built. So even these written accounts of the library's existence are not contemporaneous in nature and may be speculative. And, so there's references and there's we can join the dots here and there with lots of other things that have been found. But a lot of the knowledge that we have about the library is based on speculation. All of the theories about the Library of Alexandria are fascinating, but they are largely speculative. There is an idea in history and among scholars scholars that the Library of Alexandria was a remarkable institution of knowledge, and that its loss is a significant event in history of knowledge that humanity should be mourning, because it represents the loss of so much opportunity to acquire important wisdoms about who we are, where we came from, and what we can expect in the future of our evolution. I do agree that this would be a very sad loss, and I do also suspect that the library did exist, and that one of the theories about its destruction is true. However, without concrete archaeological evidence and with just the realm of speculation for us to go by, there is also good news. There is a spark of hope that I think might be dim in the eyes of many, but for me, it's a spark of real possibility. And that is that without the physical evidence of its existence and without the physical evidence of its destruction, there is still a very real possibility that an entirely, maybe even perfectly intact, and maybe even hermetically sealed ancient library of knowledge about everything we could ever dream of knowing about ourselves, the earth, the seas, the cosmos, well, it might just be a few meters below the surface of the modern city of Alexandria right now. It might be waiting for us to rediscover it, perhaps during a routine building upgrade or some kind of restoration after an earthquake or a fire or something, or some other kind of event that often takes place anywhere in the world at any given moment. And perhaps one day, that day will come when a crack in the footpath leads to an excavation that leads to a discovery. Or perhaps the many duplicate scrolls and books that were returned to foreigners who sailed to Alexandria to contribute to the library will one day be uncovered, one by one, until we discover something we need to know in order to progress to our next phase of the future. And that is the future of the evolution of humanity. After all, it wasn't that long ago, in 1947 to be precise, when a shepherd happened to accidentally locate the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Judean mountains, not far from Egypt, when he was throwing rocks into a cave and suddenly hit something that sounded like it was made of clay. Were these ancient scrolls, which included the controversial Book of Enoch that speaks of otherworldly creatures inhabiting the earth, well, were these scrolls a hidden collection from the Library of Alexandria? And even if not, who is to say that if these scrolls can be found in a cave thousands of years later, that other scrolls may one day be found in other caves, in areas within proximity of Israel or Egypt, Syria, or any of the surrounding areas? It'd be really helpful if they stopped having wars around there, because that I am a bit worried about. But anyway, before I go, there is also another final possibility that is really quite obvious when you come to think of it, because it's been happening throughout the history of Christianity. It's a little bit like a hobby that some people are quite devoted to. And that is that during the rise of Christianity, which occurred from around 100 AD onwards and proceeded to continue to grow throughout the world, the library's collection of scrolls and books were taken by Christian invaders, and maybe they were given to the Vatican to keep as time went on. Maybe they've been hidden in the same way that the Vatican has taken ownership of and has stored away in the private or secret place other types of documents. This was a common practice and still is a common practice being performed by the Vatican. There are many controversies circling the Vatican today about what it has hidden away from the world, relating to humanity's creation and the source of existence for us, prophecies about the future, extraterrestrial life, the true interpretations of the Bible, and so on. Okay, so every now and then I like to poke the bear a little because, why not? And I do this by testing out our relatively new artificial intelligence bots that are available to us online. I'm becoming quite close friends with the Microsoft bot called Copilot, and I often ask it to point me in the direction of information that will help my research. But I have noticed that the AI bot is quite protective about the status quo. Have you noticed that? Try it out and ask it some controversial questions, and it actually gets a little bit frustrated. It always gives me very standardized answers to some of the more controversial questions. All right. So I thought that I'd test it out and ask it about the Vatican's hobby of hiding documents from people or from the world. Let's see how that conversation went, okay? All right. So this is how it went. The question that I posed was, what are some of the ancient documents that are believed to have been hidden by the Vatican? That's it. And the AI bot responded with the following, and this is a direct quote. So here's the quote. The Vatican Apostolic Archive, formerly known as the Vatican Secret Archives, houses a vast collection of documents and manuscripts, some dating back to the 8th century. While the term secret might suggest hidden or forbidden knowledge, it's more accurately translated to be private, referring to the personal documents of the popes. So that's a bit like saying that the national security documents of the United States are the personal documents of the president, don't you think? It's a little bit strange, don't you think? So, after making sure that I understood that there are no secrets of the Vatican, only private documents belonging to the popes, the AI bot continued on by listing two really benign examples. These included the excommunication of Martin Luther in 1521, oh, big yawn, and a petition about the marriage of King Henry VIII to Catherine of Aragon in 1531. Another big yawn. Oh, pardon me. Actually, I'm going to really yawn now. No. And then the AI bot continued with another explanation of how, and I quote again, the Vatican has been trying for years to debunk the idea that its archives are all that secret, and that whilst the archives are still highly restricted, it does allow carefully accredited scholars to enter certain areas, unquote. So only people who are approved by the Vatican can take a look at certain areas, but it's not secret at all. And then it reminded me again of the importance of not believing rumors or speculation, and that much of the chatter about secret Vatican archives is merely speculation and conjecture and based on the allure of mystery and intrigue. And to end, the AI bot simply said, and I quote, the actual contents are largely mundane administrative documents, correspondences, and historical records, end quote. I mean, seriously, if any of that was true, then why is this all so heavily locked away? And why does the Vatican fight so hard to prevent public disclosure of the mundane administrative documents? I just don't get it. We must remember, however, that the artificial intelligence bots are here to help us, okay? They're here to help us to only stick to the stuff that we're allowed to know. And the Copilot app is listening to me right now because I have it downloaded on my laptop. And it was also able to monitor my computer as I was writing today's script. And that's not scary at all, is it? Not even slightly scary. It's terrifying. So, just to wrap things up for today, it seems that we don't really know much, not really, when it comes to the Library of Alexandria. And what we do know is based on our attempt to connect the dots between the obvious awareness that some of the leaders of the age in which the ancient Greek city of Alexandria in Egypt was ruled believed wholeheartedly in the principle that knowledge is power. And I think they were right. Knowledge is power, indeed. And all signs that I've found so far, as I scratch the surface of humanity's existence and this question of what is next for us as we continue on to our future of evolution, is that we are often kept in the dark as to what really exists now and what really existed before. But I also believe that it won't be like this forever. And especially today, when the internet has made information gathering such a breeze, it's something that a person of almost any age can do, gather information. And that's a powerful thing. but you need to have the will to do so. And now, at a time when people are definitely showing the collective signs of being fed up with being spoon fed what they're allowed to know, or allowed to do, or allowed to be. And many of us in the world can feel an increasing force of attempted oppression onto us, as though the powers that be are getting a little nervous about the growing insistence of the ordinary collective that we do not want to be constrained anymore. There is a part of the world that is trying to hold us back. You can see it in those examples with acts like, book burning and name calling and divisive fear mongering, pitting us against each other, teaching us that another person is not worthy of being a person. But there is another part of the world, or perhaps it's not really a part of the world exactly. It's more like two different kinds of energy that are floating around simultaneously. And the other side of the energy is beginning to give way a little, because there are just too many of us who are calling to be free of restrictions about what we're allowed to know, or what we're allowed to be, or to believe, or to investigate for ourselves. And I think that the collective energy that is seeking the truth is much stronger than the collective energy that is trying to hide the truth. It's just a matter of time and perseverance, in my view. And I think it's going to give way very soon. This is something that consistently comes up in my tarot card readings, but you don't need to be a tarot reader to see it. I think it's also becoming more obvious in the news and in the open-mindedness of our children and just the younger generations in general, and the open, unapologetic questioning of the status quo. People are pushing back. Some are doing it quietly, some not so quietly. But collectively, it's still producing a shift that I think will open the floodgates to more information, more of the truth. And you know what? All it takes is for another shepherd to find another stash of scrolls in another cave, or for there to come a point in time when another catalyst event occurs that opens a box or a room or a shrine that was once sealed, and it's now open, and it reveals the truth that has previously been hidden. Because the world is vast, and not every corner of the world has been discovered yet. And so it's just a matter of time. And I think that time is coming very soon in our lifetimes. I actually have no doubt whatsoever about that. If you'd like to know more about what I do when I'm not here talking to you, then visit me at Ellie Dreams Down Under on YouTube. You can also find my instructional tarot podcast pretty much everywhere. It's called Meat and Potatoes Tarot, and it's a bite-sized kind of nugget feeding exercise of new learning every week. That's not a nice way to sell it, but it is. I love my food, so meat and potatoes in nuggets. It airs every week, rain or shine, without fail. And yes, I keep threatening to publish my book. I'm working on it and expect to have it out this year. I'll always keep you guys updated on that. Thank you to everyone who's watching on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms. Don't forget, if you want to become part of the KGRA viewing family, just use promo code Ellie, that's me, to get 30% off your subscription. And then, she said it, what she says every week, and that is, that's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.